So let's see. Hi, good afternoon, secular fam, and happy Friday. What a week. What a week. Every week it is harder to keep up with the headlines, and that is why none of us should try, right? Like, focus on what you can. A friend of mine shared a few links with me this week, and I've asked him to put them in the chat. I don't know if he's here yet, but because I'm looking at my script right now. But one is a great video about how to meet this moment. And I really encourage you all to read it and really think about what your place is right now as we kind of slide right into fascism, because that is what's happening. Sorry. And the other is a couple of hours of nostalgia in the form of the radio program played on WKRP in Cincinnati, that TV show. So if you're a child of the 70s or 80s, just trust me on this. There's something soothing about a different time when we were all kind of like, not necessarily thinking about this stuff, including advertisements and things like that. I also would recommend Once Upon a Time in Hollywood soundtrack. It's actually also kind of the same vibe. Um, but we need to do whatever we can, and we need to lean on each other. I, for one, am going to San Diego this weekend to celebrate our development director Eddie's wedded bliss. So I'm looking forward to leaning into some happiness, and I hope that you all are going to as well. I know that there's a nationwide action tomorrow. So if you are participating in something, feel free to put it in the chat. Next week, we're going to be talking to Richard Carpiano, Ph.D., MPH, Professor of Public Policy at UC Riverside. He's going to join us for a discussion of how to counter attacks on science and public health, including the anti-vax movement. But for today we have Dr. Dawn Demps. She is a mother, bridge, interrupter, and scholar who is a Flint, Michigan native and has been involved with youth and educational programming, community advocacy, and organizing for over 25 years. She utilizes her own lived experiences to connect with students and parents to promote tools for self-advocacy, structural reforms, and strives to champion the concerns of these populations in her research foci. Dawn holds a BA in Africana Studies and Social Sciences with a concentration in Political Science and Sociology from the University of Michigan-Flint. Like, your bio kind of reads like things that our MAGA legislature would create laws about, just to make sure that you never work in this state again.
We'll talk about that.
Okay. All right. And I will monitor the chat. We're going to save the questions for after her presentation today. So I'll mute myself and I'll enjoy the presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Demps.
Okay. I do want to share my screen now. And I just want to make sure that people can see it. Can everyone see that? Okay. So, thank you, Jeannie, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. Again, my name is Dawn Demps. I'm a Flint, Michigan native. I love my hometown, so I rep it wherever I go. So you probably will hear multiple references to Flint, Michigan. And I fancy myself a mother, bridge, interrupter, and scholar. And I just kind of want to break those things down a little bit. Well, for one, I am a biological mother. I have 3 children, age 22, 20, and just turned 13. So they're all transitioning to a higher age. So I have to think about it for a minute. But also I do a lot of work on other mothering and what we call mother work in the literature. It really is the idea that I'm a communal mother, right? I'm not just mothering my own biological children, but I have care and concern for the children in my immediate community and the children of the world. I care about children. I care about mothering people who need mothering, and sometimes people need mothering that are beyond children, right? I consider myself a bridge. I have had the fortunality of being in spaces not made for me. I will talk about that a little bit later. But because I am in these spaces, I try as much as possible within my power to create a venue for other people who would also be excluded and denied those spaces, a way to get into those spaces. I'm an interrupter. You will not say crazy stuff in front of me and I be silent. I do not believe in silence. And I do believe in civility. I do believe in being respectful when you speak, but I do believe in saying what you said. I do believe in that. And I think that that is powerful. I think that it's very scary right now that we are in a time where everyone is feeling like quiet somehow will save us. and it will not. It is shown historically that it does not. And then lastly, I'm a scholar. And I put being a scholar last, not because it is the thing that is least meaningful to me, but unfortunately, especially at this time, my journal writing, the things that I put into scholarship are not reaching the masses, right? It is the other things that I do before my engagement in community that I find to be most powerful. But my scholarship does, in fact, help to invite people into conversations that we need to have conversations with, like policymakers, right? So just a little bit about me. I would like to start with a story. So the type of research I do a lot of oral history, I do ethnographic work. So I am going to move to my next slide. A little story time. And I want to say that that picture was created by my son. And I have written at length about my son. And at the end, I will share, Jeannie, I'm sorry I didn't send things before. I will share links. I can share links to articles and things like that that I talked to. But yes, the picture does need to be painted. But that is my son's work. He did that a few years back. But point being, he's always been an artist. He loves comic books. So to fast forward, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I wrote what we call an autoethnographic piece on my experience, my son being suspended from school for drawing a picture when he was 9 years old. Okay, so this is me coming to the principal's office, they called me. And this is not, nor will it be his last suspension. While I was looking at the literal comic strip drawing of him transforming into a superhero to defeat the foe that had given him a poor grade, his math teacher had given him an F. My son entered the room alone, and I told him, close the door and tell me what happened. He seated and he said that he did indeed draw a comic book strip at home of him turning into a superhero and taking on his supervillain math teacher to destroy her after she gave him an F on his math test. And since it had been done at school, since we had been at this school, he had often complained about this particular math teacher's refusal to help him. She actually said out loud in front of the class, "It is not my fault you came here late in the year. If you are having trouble, you will just need to figure it out." And just for reference, I actually moved to Arizona back then for a few months and then moved back to Michigan. So we entered the middle of the school year, and that's what she said to him. I had gone in to sit in to observe this teacher after this incident, and she indeed was the type of teacher that spent more time belittling her students than actually teaching. There was no relational connection in her approach, and I would have believed her an uncertified instructor that had never been taught age-appropriate pedagogy, much less cultural cognizance. I could understand my son's frustration. My son, who sold comic strip pictures to other students at the school for a quarter to raise money for himself, had created the picture at home after receiving the failing grade in frustration. Another student came across this picture while looking at his regular comic book wares to purchase because he had forgotten to take it out of the folder. My son was immediately sent to the office and suspended. When the teacher came back in the room, I told her, when the principal came back in the room, I said, "I know you cannot truly believe my son is a threat to this teacher. Why aren't you offering? If you did, then you should be offering counseling or some other restorative intervention." She looked at me straight in the eye and said, "Honestly, we don't have the resources to do that." And then she pushed the paper in front of me to sign. I put the paper in my purse and told her I refused to sign it and walked out the room. I knew the potential implications of this incident and what they would have on his possibilities into the future. Schools would try to use this to filter him out, and I did not actually tell my son he was suspended during these 3 days. I did not want this knowledge floating around in his head and creating further self-destructive negative barriers and beliefs. Due to my privilege in my education and the type of work I did, I was able to take him with me during those 3 days to my job, to museums, to meetings, and to community events. He honestly likely had a more educationally rich experience with me than he would have had at school. This only made me think deeper about the realities that parents not privileged by education and position must deal with during instances of school pushout. Still, with all my knowledge, the reality of this single moment would continue to impact him well into his future. The first barrier came the first year when I attempted to enroll him in another school. It was a charter school that he had actually previously attended. I filled out the enrollment form and turned it into the office. The next morning, I received a call from the school saying that the principal needed to meet with me because of something that was on the form. I went to the office and the principal said, "Miss Demps, I am glad to see you. We have some concerns about your son. He was suspended for threatening a teacher." I breathed deeply and began to retell the story of exactly what happened. And I had to clearly state that no weapons were involved, there was no direct threat, and the picture was never intended for the teacher to even see. That my then 9-year-old son had not attempted to physically intimidate or directly threaten anyone. That my son did not give a reason, something to the teacher to scare her. That my son had not been aggressive towards this teacher in any way. I was asked to step out of the room while the principal conferenced with the other people to determine whether or not they would accept him. After what was seeming like 5 hours, but probably was 5 minutes, they called me back into the office and the principal said, "After reviewing Jay's previous record with us and your statements, we have determined that we will admit him for this year. But please understand this is a probational admit, and any further referral or write-up will result in his immediate expulsion from school." So that's just a piece. I didn't read the whole thing, but I write a lot about my experiences with expulsion. I have worked with young people for a very, very long time, and I did not know what the school to prison pipeline was intimately until my son started having these incidences. And the other kids, especially the boys, not only the boys, but especially the boys that I work with in the community of Flint, Michigan. I used to run youth programs at the Urban League of Flint. And my boys, I call them my boys still to this day, at the high school down the street would get suspensions for some of the wildest things, like wearing their hoodies in school in November in Michigan with the heat not turned on yet, right? And then there would be questions because they assumed they were carrying guns underneath their hoodies. Or another one that actually I've written about is being called to the school or going to the school to help represent the boys because they were accused of being in a gang, when actually all four of the boys were not only related, most of them lived in the same house, they were cousins and brothers, but the principal accused them of being a gang. I started going more deeply into what the school to prison pipeline was. So my specific work is I have defined education exclusion to go a little bit more beyond what we know as the school to prison pipeline. So the school to prison pipeline are the policies and practices that effectively push a student out of the school building and onto the path for judicial contact, right? No matter whether it's probation or whatever other things or death. Right. Again, coming from where I'm from, I knew if those kids were not in school, that they were out in the street walking, right? If they couldn't get home or their parents were working, and that was way more dangerous than keeping them in the school. So that is what the school to prison pipeline is. I look at educational exclusion to expand that a little bit to look at not just those suspension and expulsion policies that put kids out of the school building at a disproportionate rate for Black and Brown children, students with disabilities, English language learners. We can go down the list. There are so many. But students who are on the margins, right? And I don't mean the margins like they're dangerous. I mean the margins of the American imagination, right? They're not considered normal, right? So historically, they have been disenfranchised. These students tend to be pushed out. But I thought that we need to look more at the policies and the barriers that kick people out of education more wholesale. Okay, so educational exclusion refers to the myriad of avenues that inhibit full participation in any facet of education. So super quick example, during my research, which I will talk about a little bit later, I had one mother who was telling her story of her experiences in school. She had won a spelling bee. And this probably was like the 1960s, 1970s. She had won the spelling bee, had made it up. She was getting ready to go to the county spelling bee, and she had rolled her eyes. She rolled her eyes. and they kicked her out and told her that she could not represent the school. This was a Black woman, a Black child at the time, and that was the excuse given to her. So that was an exclusionary experience that put her out of her full participation to be a representative for the school or whatever. So that's an example of how I use the term educational exclusion. So unfortunately, this history of exclusion is nothing new. So in my research, I focus on Black communities, not Black communities only, but that is my focus area. So I look at the history of exclusion, the current iterations of exclusion, and the other side of that is I look at how it is these communities respond, right? Because we are active in our lives. We are not just passive, accepting things. And even though the rhetoric will often pose Black people or other marginalized folks as if they just sit here and they don't fight and they don't do anything for anyone and they just let things happen to them, my research was really interested in the ways that, in fact, we do fight and we do push back and what that looks like, right? So that is my research. So a quick history of Black educational exclusion. Heather Williams in what was it, 2005, wrote in her book, oh goodness, Self-Taught. Her book, Self-Taught. Heather Williams wrote in her book, Self-Taught, about what education looked like for the enslaved population, right? And she talked about like these very creative ways that people who were working in the house, right, would write down or steal pages out of books when their slave masters' children were being tutored, right? And then folding them up and putting them in their kerchief and then taking them back to the slave quarters so that they could look at them and study them, so they can teach themselves. Looking at how these soldiers during the Civil War and before and beyond would take on certain type of positions in the military so they could get educated and then take that knowledge back to their people so they could learn from there. Okay, so this understanding, Heather Williams wrote very beautifully about how it is education has always been central to the Black experience, regardless of what the stereotypes say. And then we move forward a little bit, and this could be a whole webinar by itself, but we talk about Brown v. Board and the backlash of Brown v. Board. A lot of people do not know that there were two Brown v. Board decisions, Brown v. Board 1, and then a year later, Brown v. Board 2, because there was very little movement on the decision, right? And then that's where you get busing and all of those other things. But also what we see happening is, for example, in the Prince Edward's School County in Virginia, they decided to entirely shut down the entire school district rather than allow Black students to go to school with white children. They shut down the entire school district. And so what did this do? And I think that Prince Edward's County is a very interesting example, especially with what we're seeing now with school vouchers and all of these other things. They shut down the school system. And so that left minimal options for Black families. So where did the Black families go to school if the public schools were closed? Well, some were able to do homeschooling and these type of things and go to churches, but it was not on the mass scale that was necessary, especially since most people had to work, right? And you also have literacy issues of people that don't have the capacity to teach if historically you still have people alive that have been alive during enslavement during this time, right? So understanding this, so they set up this whole other school system of private schools that were funded by the state that disallowed Black students from going to them. Okay, so that's another example. The school to prison pipeline, I won't spend too much time on it, but I will reference it later because we are having a resurgence, especially with legislation that, or a colleague later or whatever he does, executive order that was most recently passed. So again, the school to prison pipeline, which I already mentioned. Michael Dumas wrote about schools as sites of Black suffering. So it's this idea that there is a lot of pain in school spaces for marginalized students. And he focuses on Black students also, but that there is a silence around it because it re-emphasizes the stereotype that we don't care about education if we're complaining about it. So we stay silent and don't say anything. Meanwhile, there's all this trauma. And then in your mind, this belief that the education system is just not for me. And so as soon as I can get out, I'm getting out, right? And last but not least, Fenwick wrote 2022, Jim Crow's Pink Slip, his book, and I mean her book, and that, I mean his book, I'm sorry, and that is talking about after, right, Brown v. Board, there were residual effects because you had the removal of teachers, the removal of administrators who most often were more educated than their white counterparts, yet the white counterparts were taking their place. Right. Once we had integration, they got rid of the Black teachers and the Black educators. And this is what we're seeing now. So if you flip it to before Brown v. Board, where most of the educators, the lion's share, and not only, like, let's be clear that there were white educators that came from the North to the South to educate students and that sort of thing, but the lion's share of educators that would see Black students were Black teachers. And then after Brown v. Board, not even slowly, actually quite quickly, they went away. They got rid of them. And this is why we have the teacher shortage, the Black teacher shortage that people talk about now, and everyone questions why this happens, right? We know why this happened. So all of those things are historical, but let's talk about what's happening today. With this, especially with this current administration. So we have what I like to call the phenomenon of data deletion. So there seems to be a belief that if you delete the data, the phenomenon didn't happen, right? If you take it away, it doesn't exist. So when people complain about things like the continued disparity in suspension rates with students, and one thing I definitely want to say about that is the literature has established that the overwhelming majority, if not all, of the suspension rate is not attributed to differences in behavior. It is attributed to differences in response. And those differences in response correlate to the race of the student, correlate to other identity markers of the student, whether or not they are LGBTQ and whether or not they're English language learners. This has been established. And one of the things that I like to point out, especially English language learners, when you look at the test scores and the gaps. So there are gaps, absolutely. But look at ELL students' math scores and then look at their reading scores. Numbers are numbers, right? For the most part. But letters are not. They're smart enough to be able to get mathematical concepts easier, but they can't grasp language. It's because you have denied them the tools that they need to learn. And instead of giving them their tools, you put this deficit frame on them. Richard Valencia at UT Austin, I believe he is still at, wrote about the deficit thinking that powers the entire education system. That instead of giving students and families the tools they need, you say that there is something wrong with them. There is something wrong with their culture. Black folks don't value education. There is something wrong with their brains. They're not smart enough. Oh, English language learners, they're stupid, they're retarded, they can't learn. Instead of giving them the tools they need to learn. Okay, so if we delete the data, then none of that's happening. I say none of that is happening. History reanimation. So they're not erasing history, they're retelling history, right? So we know the hunter gets to tell the tale, and he will never tell the tale of how he went into the forest that the lion lives in, that the lion has resided in, and decided to shoot them with a gun. Instead, it becomes a whole different tale. And we are seeing that across the country. School closures, the ways that school closures serve for exclusion. Again, I'm from Flint, Michigan. The lion's share of students in Flint, Michigan live on what we call the north side of Flint. And the north side of Flint has 0 high schools, 0 public high schools on the north side. It used to. They were all shut down. Okay. And there are many communities. You can look at New Orleans, what happened at New Orleans, the Hurricane Katrina became a feast for people who were waiting to make money off of educational dollars for schooling. Okay. It in itself is a case study. So that's one example. In Phoenix, we just had the closure. Look at the schools they closed. What communities are those schools in, and what students did those schools serve? But they had to close the schools, yet we're opening up more charter schools, right? With public dollars. Um, Education and administrative homogenization, we still have that. We continue to have that. No one seems to be able to crack the nut on how it is we bring in other people that aren't just white English speakers. I have been inside of school buildings in Arizona, I'm in Arizona now, that don't have a single person who can speak Spanish in the building. How do you do that? I have been in schools that don't have a single Black teacher. How do you do that? How is that accomplished, right? So we have that happening. The anti-college rhetoric. So pay attention to who is told you don't need college. Don't worry about that. And I'm not saying the trades aren't good. Again, that could be a whole nother talk. But there is something dangerous when you start discouraging students from going on to college so they can become what? The researchers that we need to create what? The data that they're deleting. Understand how all of these things are connected, right? The shuttering of cultural centers here at my university. I'm at University of Arizona. We have shut down our African American Student Center. It has been shuttered. Again, you have this whitewashing of these specific spaces that were created to help students to feel comfortable in the space and to have a home place where they can share their experience without worry of reprimand. And those things are being deleted. Again, contributing to the anti-college rhetoric, because when I bring Black students here on campus, because I am pro-college, let's be clear. But when I try to invite Black students to come look at the campus, and they want to know where the space exists, this will be the first year that I can say, well, really, there is no Black space for you. I'm sorry. I apologize. Um, Willful funding deficits. I don't want to go too far into this. There are other scholars. Jeannie, remind me, I can send you other scholars who can talk about the funding deficits. But when I say willful, when you have money to pay for a golden ballroom, you have money to fund education. So it's willful, right? This is not some accident of the matrix. It's the way it was built. And then, of course, the presence of ICE agents on school grounds. In my daughter's own school last year last year at the end of the year, ICE agents came on campus near the end of the school year, and parents were called, and it was frantic, and they put the school in lockdown. The next week, almost 70% of the students did not come to school for the entire week. So not only are we talking about our refugee students, our immigrant student populations, we're also talking about the residual effects that this have on your American-born students that are sitting in this classroom and see that their friends are in so much fear that they haven't come to school. They are feeling the impacts of that as well. Let me look at time. Okay. So, in my research, I studied a group of Black mothers who were organizing to fight the school to prison pipeline specifically. But during my time with them, and like I said, I do ethnographic work, so I was with them wholesale for about almost 3 years with this group of mothers, and following their work and seeing how they grew, and they became a 501c3 while I was there with them, and all these other things happened. I was able to see the group progress, and I looked at the ways that they were able to respond, or the strategies that they used to respond. And this is a small t theory that I am working on. um, but the three things that I mainly saw them do is racial socialization, or what we call accommodation. So accommodation in the literature, and none of these terms are anything that I'm making up, but the theorization is how it is I'm putting them together. So accommodation is kind of like that shut up and survive mentality, for lack of a better word, right? You do what you need to do to get through. Also, you see a lot of that, unfortunately, in some of the Black respectability politics. This idea that if we can be as good as them, then they will leave us alone, right? We have to consistently and constantly prove ourselves. But what you find, unfortunately, right, is that that doesn't matter. I remember when Dr. Henry Louis Gates' home was, he was arrested for trying to get into his home. And if you don't know who he is, I mean, he has a TV show. He's a world-renowned historian. He's a Black historian, and he was arrested in his very posh neighborhood. They looked at his Blackness, and he's an older gentleman. So no matter his degrees, no matter his money, that did not save him from the experience, right? So that really is accommodation. Those things are together. And then organizing, and I'm going to go over to organizing. And organizing are the things that we do to try to fix the system, to hold the system to account for the things that they say matter. It's not even trying to create a whole new idea or line of thinking. It's saying, this is what you said is important, but you're not doing these things for us. And we're going to force you to do that. We're going to pressure you to do that so that you, in fact, can be open to all students, all children, all families. We're going to organize to put pressure on the system so it could fulfill its own promises, right? And then last but not least is racial protectionism, what I call evacuation. So we're looking at accommodation, transformation, and evacuation. And that is when parents and families leave a educational system. And there are layers to evacuation. So evacuation, if we look at the public education system, right, as the vortex of what it is education is. It's the thing that we provide. So levels of evacuation can be parents leaving and going to charter schools. That is a level of evacuation. Most parents don't leave and decide to go to a charter school for no reason. If they have a quality public school in their neighborhood, that their children have access and transportation to, that have teachers and educators that can reflect them, that have good support systems, they will go to that school. When they don't have those things, they will go to a charter school. And I think that we are not having that conversation enough. We make it very black and white. We make it very red or black when really it's maroon, when really it's muddy. It's not just, oh, we hate public schools, at least on the side of parents, especially marginalized parents. That's not what it is. It's about, this system has not provided what it is I need. And so I'm going to try this other system. But then they go there and they realize that not only are things not better, but more often than not, they are worse. There are some shining examples, of course, but again, I think it's comparing apples and oranges when you look at a parallel school system. Go back to the Prince Edward story, a parallel school system that at the end of the day is kind of able to handpick their students. Public schools cannot. Public schools take whoever walk into their doors. They accept all students. And when you take money consistently from them to provide what it is needed for all of those students, and you have this other system with this shiny new building, it is very provocative. But the other thing about evacuation is you have parents totally, especially Black and brown parents, pulling their students out of school wholesale because the public school system has caused such pain to their children, and homeschooling them or unschooling them. There are all these other movements that, and we're not talking about the ones that are, oh, we don't want to go to school with Black and brown kids, so we're pulling our kids out to put them in white schools or in private schools because those kids are deficient. No, these are parents who are like, my children have been harmed, they're hurt, they've been suspended multiple times, teachers are saying horrible things to them. So they unschool or they homeschool their students. So these are all, I want us to think about these things like simultaneously and not like these distinct separate spheres, because they're not. And they often operate at the same time. So I just want to share a couple quotes from some of the mothers that I interviewed when I was doing this, when it comes to transformation. And really, I focused on transformation and evacuation because for me, those were the most provocative findings of my research. And yes, accommodation absolutely was in there throughout, but their insistence on transforming the system and my view of them starting to evacuate the system. I saw before the mothers created an alternative school system, I saw it coming. Okay, I tell everyone that. Like, I knew what was coming because they had so much frustration in trying to work with the system and trying to transform it. And so more and more, I'm kind of getting a little bit disillusioned. And this is the mother who was put out of the spelling bee. So she came up during integration, during this change. She was an older mother. I think it is better for people in general, though, to learn how to get along with all people. I just believe in public schools, and that's why I'm not a proponent for pulling our kids out of school. So she's talking about why it is we have to keep up the fight to do what it is that help them fulfill the promises that they have for public school. This is another mother. There has never been inclusion. There has not been equity. It has not ever been a place for us to be comfortable because it was not built for us. So there's nothing we can do about that. I think that, and she's talking about why they stay in there. I think we make sure that while we are in this space, because we need to be in this space, that we're not being treated wrong, that our students are not being treated wrong, but we have to, I think, really look at it from that aspect that this is not for us. So it's not ever going to be inclusive. That's just my own experience growing up and going to school. I never felt included in any way. So these are grown women from the ages of 30 to 75, I think was the oldest mother I interviewed. These are their memories of their school experiences. And that's how strong it was that they were able to like retain these things like the spelling bee story, or one mother whose mother she had not met at that time because her mother was addicted to drugs, and the teacher made fun of her when she said that she was going to call her mother on her, and she said, well, you can't, my mother's not home. And the teacher said, why? Doesn't your mother want you? In front of the entire class, not knowing that this girl had in fact never met her mother. But that's what she said in front of the class. And then 30 years later, this mother shared this story with me. That is ingrained trauma. That is ingrained pain. And I use artwork. So this is just a collage that one of the mothers created to show the tension between Black mothers and Black communities and the educational system, how it is that Black folks are needed, and when they are needed, that we train them only as far as they need to go. And even if they are overeducated, they are still treated poorly. Okay, and then evacuation. How did their experiences affect their response to the school system? And so here's one mother, Carson. And so I don't know if it's possible. I don't think it's possible. And my question to her was, do you think that schools will ever be equitable places? Any school will ever be equitable places? I think it would have to be, like, I don't want to say resegregation, but that's just not how our systems are built. It would take a complete tear down and rebuild further to be, as a school, to be a safe place for Black kids. And then this is another mother who was a grandmother. She said, I thank God for COVID, for shutting down the schools. It gave my son confidence to know he can teach his son himself. Now he can keep my grandbaby out them schools. And then last but not least, this is the founder of the organization that the mothers that I was interviewing. She said, so I'm really looking to create more. And especially now that this is a great opportunity to do that, the COVID-19 has presented some additional opportunities for us because now our kids are home with their parents. They are safe. Now, why do I say this? If you all get nothing else from me today, I want you to know this is not simple. This is not simple. And I am saddened by the warring factions that I see when we talk about educational access, when we talk about school funding, when we talk about vouchers. And because we are not including the right people at the table, we are not having the right conversations. And that is why ill-intentioned actors are able to come in and tear us all apart, because they are able to use the real pain that really exists in communities. It's not fake. They're not making it up. They've really been hurt. Because we're not having those conversations, because we're not being honest, they're able to come in and pick us apart, right? Like seagulls, just picking it and going and flying off. And what will be left after that happens, right? Are they actually creating systems for us with the rhetoric of vouchers and all of the other things that are helpful? In the end, we will be left with nothing. Transformation, evacuation are not binary approaches. Okay, so in my stories, in my interviews with the mothers, I saw that they had faith. They still had some faith in public education and this belief that the public education system is the only possibility for bridging these gaps we have in this United States of America, because we are a diverse country, whether they like it or not. It is what it is. And how is it that we create these inroads with other groups that maybe we did not grow up with? You get that in school. You get that in school. That is a beautiful, wonderful opportunity to learn about other cultures, to learn about other belief systems, to have access to other people. But at the same time, they believe in the permanence of anti-Blackness. Again, not wanting to go too far into it, but critical race theory, and everybody like, critical race. Most people don't know what critical race theory is, and I'm actually a critical race theory scholar, which was created by Dr. Derek Bell, who, when I say he fought and stood 10 toes down, he did. I would encourage you to read Derek Bell, Faces at the Bottom of the Well, any of his writings. He was a lawyer, but he talked about the permanence of racism, and people called him a pessimist and said they didn't want to hear that. But is it not permanent? I think that our inability to face the permanence of oppression is how we got where we are today. Is we took our hands off the wheel and then they came and took it over while we weren't watching, because we thought we had it. We thought we had reached the apex, the high point. And in fact, that is not what had happened. And then what else we see, or I saw in my research, is the need for fugitivity and maroonage. So maroons historically are spaces that were created in the United States of America. Enslaved populations, there would be people who would escape, and probably the most popular maroons are the Gullah Islands, what came to be known as the Gullah Islands, that are over in the Carolinas. And they left and they created like villages and communities that maintained their African cultures, their language, their practices, their artistry, all of those things. And again, why this is such a sticky and complicated and nuanced discussion that we need to start having is because those same Gullah Islands, those same properties are now being overrun by capitalist venture folks who are taking those islands and trying to turn them into resorts, right? So scholars have written about maroons, understanding that maroons are reprieve, right? So they're breaks, but they cannot be a true heaven because they can always be taken over. They are always under attack, right? Going back to the permanence, not just of racism, but the permanence of oppression in general. There will always be someone waiting to take over what it is you've tried to retain. And then there were signs of progress, but it wasn't real progress because groups have been given seats at the table to only find out they really don't have a voice. They really don't have any power. But they will use you to be at the table, either A, to be a token, or B, to do labor that they don't care to learn how to do themselves, right? So, for example, when they had the Black mothers come into different school districts to help with talking to their Black students when they had trouble. But what that did is that didn't create an opportunity for the actual teachers and administrators that were in the school building to also learn how to deal with Black students, right? They put that labor on the mothers that was uncompensated as well, right? And so we see those things too. So what must be done? And this is just Dawn Demps speaking. We have to continue pressuring educational institutions to muster the courage and creativity to continue interventions and supports. We are stronger than we are. And I theorize, unfortunately, and I know this feels uncomfortable for people, but some people are acquiescing so easily because some people wanted to acquiesce in the first place. We need to understand that, right? If you came into my home and you told me to shoot one of my children in the head, you couldn't make me do it. You could not make me do it. It- Not at all with any ease. You probably have to drug me up or something. But if you just come in and you say it and I say, oh, shoot, well, you know what, Journey Janzor, I'm sorry, but they came in and they said if I don't do this, I'm going to be in trouble. And this is what we're seeing happening with so many of our students. Now, there are some examples of ones that are fighting back. And they're also, again, looking at evacuation, transformation, and accommodation, sometimes keeping your head down, but still doing the work, right? Still doing the work is resistance. And so I see that happening too. I see schools or even colleges changing the names of things, but still doing the work that is necessary to provide the services for the students that they need to provide. And so that too is also possible. I am intrigued by the ones that don't even attempt to do that. Understand? We need to provide mirrors of possibility for our families. I think it is important for everyone to see an example of what their future can be. And when I say identity, I mean racial identity, gender identity, mothering, parenting identity, fathering identity. This morning, I had a phone call from one of my students, and I teach only grad students. So all of my students are like 28 and older. They're all teachers, principals, superintendents, and she had just had a baby. And she shared with me, she wanted to continue the class, even though she came in knowing that this was going to happen. And I responded to her and I said, I want you to take the incomplete. I promise you, you will be fine. And she's just insisting. I could have said, you know what, if you can't get it done on time, if you can't I know you just had your kid yesterday morning, but if you can't get it done on time, I'm going to fail you. You shouldn't have signed up for the class. But because I am a mother, because I do understand, because of another one of my identity markers, I was able to have empathy with this student. Okay. We need to understand that empathy comes with being a mirror, comes with understanding that person's background and where they come from. We need to create internal and external kin networks. And so, again, pushing for these educational institutions to continue to have support systems and special offices to reach out to particular students because particular students and particular families have particular needs. What it is that a student in a wheelchair is going to need is very different than what a student who is blind is going to need. And if you attempt to give them equal services, somebody's going to fail. Probably they both will. And I don't understand why we can't wrap our minds around that. School leaders must be challenged to empower historically marginalized people beyond a token seat at the table. Stop having people at the table just to say you have them at the table, but they have no voice. They have no voice, they have no power, or you open up offices that have no funding. These are all token things. Maroons as part of a both and or approach. So I understand the need for homeschooling. In the end, I homeschooled my own son, his final year of high school, because of things that had happened. My son went from being like 5'8" to 6 foot over Christmas break. It was weird. It was wild. But when he got back to school after that Christmas break, the assistant principal, who probably was 5'7", no exaggeration, for whatever reason, had his eye on my Black boy who was in a school of 95% white students. And Jay could do nothing right. Before he was fine. He was quiet, whatever. But something happened. So I had to pull my son out. And I advocate for public education, right? Unceasingly. I do believe that it has the best potential, but we have to nourish it. It's like any seed. If you do not water it, if you do not give it fertilizer, if you do not put it in front of the sun, it will die. And trust and believe that what is happening with this administration, they want it to die. And there's a reason they want it to die. It's because they want to create these other school systems that are sitting beside the public school system that will leave only particular children there, and they know that. We have to prepare to organize, get brave, and resist perpetually. This is a forever battle. This is not a you rest. And another reason I believe in maroons is I do think you need places to rest. I do believe you need places just to relax and breathe and say, I can totally be myself here, but understanding will always be under attack. Just look at HBCUs as another example. HBCUs are an exclusionary response. They were a response that was created, and we got these school buildings and we got this land to put these schools on, but they have always been underfunded, always been underfunded. And not only that, but if you look at the history of the trustees and the leadership and often the professorship at HBCUs, they were still run by people who were not representative of the people that the schools were supposed to be serving. So we have to have an and or approach. And I know it's exhausting and I know it's tiring and I know everyone wants to act like, oh, we're going to reach the promised land and it'll be over. But that just is not how freedom works. I am done. I was trying to go very quickly so we can have some time for questions. So I'm going to end my stop share.
Mm-hmm. That was great. You know, I've seen you speak in the past, and it's always just really relevant, and it's like the same things that I've been hearing since I got into the classroom back in 2008. And full disclosure, I got in Teach for America. It was a second career for me. I finished school as a non-traditional student. I had 2 kids, and I was like, okay, teacher, job security. It wasn't like my passion, but it became my passion. I stayed in the classroom for 14 years. And a lot of the people that I knew, the good ones anyway, stayed in the classroom. I mean, a lot of them, it's like 2 years, resume builder. I have a clerkship with, you know, Scalia or whoever just waiting for me, an internship at Bear Stearns, you name it, you know, because it's an organization oozing with privilege. And so I spend every waking moment trying to undo anything that I may have contributed to in the past.
Right, yes.
Okay, so here is Jennifer. She says, do we know what they are doing with the schools when they shut down? Is there no way to reclaim those buildings, use those schools as a more community-based learning center?
Yeah, so there are examples of that happening. So here in Tucson, the school has been closed for some time. The first segregated school for Black students was Dunbar, the Dunbar School here in Tucson. And when the Dunbar closed after integration, the community has repurchased the building. And so it's like a Black community center here in Tucson. And it took a lot of years. It took a long time, but they have slowly but surely been building up that space. So I do see some of that happening. Also, a lot of what I see happening is charter school systems and private schools purchasing the buildings. There's a lot of that going on as well. In Flint, when they were trying to get rid of buildings, they would like sell them for $1. There was a moment where they were selling school buildings for $1 just to get rid of it. Because of course that's an insurance weight on them and all the other things. And then when things happen in the building, the school district was still accountable. Like if kids were coming through, and doing whatever kids do, right? And if there was an accident, then the district would be accountable. So they were trying to get rid of the building. So I know that some went to churches, that sort of thing. So there are efforts, but largely mixed. The thing I've seen most is actually, honestly, they just going into disrepair a lot of the time.
Here's a question from Mark. Given the current environment with vouchers in Arizona and Emperor Trump's destruction of equal rights, i.e. DEI, in Washington, what is our best strategy at this point? Yes, I'm sure you have it ready to go.
Yes, I do. And I'm going to be a millionaire tomorrow. No, I think, like I said, I think it's a multi-pronged strategy. And that really was the point of the presentation, that it has to be a both and. I do think that we all pay taxes. And again, that's a historical thing where Black folks used to pay taxes into schools that they were not allowed into. And then they had to fund their community schools in addition to the taxes that they paid for the quote unquote public school system at that time that disallowed them to be part of it. So I think we need to continue demanding that public education looks like the way we need it to look, because we are taxpayers and we are paying for this, period. The other thing, though, is I do think that we do need to create additional avenues for us to be educated beyond the school building. Again, coming from Flint, Michigan, and arguably Flint, Michigan is the home of the community schools model, and that's a whole nother talk. But I remember coming up when I was young, unfortunately, before Reaganomics all the way took over. But we used to go to school and we used to watch the movies in the afternoon in the gym and have popcorn. And there used to be roller skating in the school, and there were sewing classes in the school for the parents. Like there was always something happening in the school at all times. And I think we can do that. I think that we need to partner better and partner more with our nonprofit organizations, understanding that we are all under attack, including those nonprofit organizations, right? Understand that. So instead of us operating with this separate mindset, I do think we need to come together with more of these entities, including the university system. I'm here in the university. They know that I pressure them all the time. Like, why do you not know anything about what's happening in the school down the street from us? Because we're not engaged. Because unfortunately, once we get into the ivory tower, you just become singularly focused on research or writing or whatever it is, but you have no idea what's going on in the community that you have your school, your university sitting on, right? That is often, again, going back into history, Black, Indigenous, formerly brown land that you're sitting on, Indigenous land that you've taken, but you don't know what's going on in the community insofar as it helps a grant. And so we need to change that mindset. We need to understand that if one of us falls, we all fall. So we need to start working better together. I would say that. And it starts in small micro groups. This is a long-term thing. This is not a today. This is what we're going to turn around. And then showing up. We have to show up at these board meetings or all this other stuff. All the energy that they give to us to shut down freedom, to shut down, I mean, like real freedom, not freedom the way they use it, understand, to shut down justice, to shut down equity, to shut down support, to shut down love. Really, that's what it is. You don't love people if you are trying to take away the things that they need to survive and thrive. You can't love them. So we need to counteract that just as loudly and just as passionately, or they're going to say that nobody cares. Just like they delete the data. If they delete our voices, then nobody cares.
Like, I feel like what you're describing is like, if any of you have read Parable of the Sower, it reminds me like Earthseed. We just need, we need little acorns everywhere and have our little earth seeds, right? And everybody's working towards a common goal. And it's a holistic approach to education where people can find their place in the compassion, which again, the other side has literally turned into a flaw in your character if you have empathy or compassion for others. So that's a really difficult space to navigate as well. I have one question for you, because you mentioned how some places are doing the thing but renaming it, right? Like there have been a few schools here who very quietly say, oh, okay, you don't want DEI, cool. We're just going to go ahead and follow the Civil Rights Act though, and we're going to follow all that. And we're going to take out the words that are offensive to you, but we're still going to do the exact same thing. So do you think that's the approach, as opposed to digging your heels in and saying, absolutely not, we're keeping this and we're not going to sugarcoat it for you because this is what best practices dictate for our students?
Okay, I tell you, I think you need both.
Okay.
I think you need both, because I think if everyone is acting like they're going along to get along, then they're going to continue thinking that nothing is wrong.
Yeah.
So I think that you need both. It's like you need Malcolm and Martin. It's not either or. It's not. And for me, myself, historically, I don't know if any of my friends or family are on here, but people, in my younger years, my age has tempered me some, but I was the person who, I'm going to speak up. Like, let's go. I'm leading the march. I'm talking, da 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 da. And that was necessary, and that is necessary, but you also need the people on the inside, right? So while people are out marching, MLK was helping to imagine what the civil rights law would look like. Those meetings were happening at the same time. And I think people lose sight of that. They think it's an either or. Again, it's a both and. I think you need both of those things to happen. And I think that some school districts, being specific to education, are way more stronger. So a Harvard, which I do appreciate what Harvard is doing, a Harvard can afford to do that. They can do that. And I think where you can, you should. And if you don't, that just tells me that you never wanted to in the first place, that you were just waiting for a reason to shut this stuff down anyway. And now I know I can't trust you.
Yeah, boy, that part right there. Okay, a couple things. This is the part, Ian, if you want to drop that link in. Like I said, he gave this link, or he shared this YouTube video about how we can meet this moment and be successful at it. And that includes, doing what you can. I have a friend who's going through chemo and radiation right now, and just watching this and feeling despair. And I was like, but you know what? You can still email your schools. You can call the schools in your area to see if they have a plan for what they're going to do when ICE comes onto their campus, because it is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. And it was in the Arizona Republic today about the complicit behavior of our, local law enforcement agencies with ICE, and they are traumatizing our families, and their mutual aid networks. My point here is for like everybody who's watching it, like this is my hope today, is that I hope all of you engage at the most local level, and that is your school district. I hope that you contribute to those families who are hiding in their homes right now, that you show up to the board meetings, that you make sure that they have a safe schools plan. I mean, just last night in a very progressive district, Phoenix Union High School District, because we have a MAGA cult member as our county superintendent, appointed this guy, Jeremiah Cota. And what did he do when he was asked as a Apache San Carlos Native American, you're new, we're going to go ahead and, please do the land acknowledgement. What does he do? He slips in the Lord's Prayer. Why? Because he has a religious micro school on the reservation. Do you know what I mean? Like, so all of us, even in those safe spaces, need to let them know that we are watching. And thankfully, they handled it great in that district. But we need to be watching them and letting them know that we are watching them and providing mutual aid for folks. I'm sorry. Okay, this is not my show because we are all here for you, Dr. Demps, and we are over time. So I want to end our discussion today with how we usually end it, and that is to ask you, in these difficult times, what gives you hope, Dr. Demps?
What gives me hope, honestly, are the young people that I see that have not given in to despair. That is what gives me hope. And so many of them have a reason to. So many of them have a reason to check out. So many of them have a reason to lean into cynicism. And I think that you can have a realistic optimism. And I do think there's a place for cynicism, but the young people are really trying to push through in a world that is, they would have every reason not to be hopeful. They would have every reason not to be hopeful. And so when I see young people doing it anyway, that is what gives me hope. And I would just say to everyone, listen, rest where you can. Do not try to put on your shoulders that you can do everything, because no one can, because they will have the system kill us trying to fight it, and they will eat our carcasses for dinner and keep it moving. You will be gone and dead. So yes, we need to stack efforts strategically. We need to stack efforts strategically so we can survive and be here for the permanence of this struggle.
Because on the other side of it, whether it's in my lifetime or my grandson's, it could be a thing of beauty. And that's what we're going for here, is to finally, get that arc of history that we've heard so much about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Demps. I mean, honestly, and the praise in the chat is just off the charts. I have a feeling that this is probably going to end up being one of our most watched. This was just so fabulous. And you've already said you're coming back 2 other times for 2 other really difficult topics, right?
We'll talk about it, but yes, I'm interested.
All right, awesome. Well, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, Dr. Demps, and I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend too, Secular Fam. Take care of each other.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.